I mentioned last week, I want to spend some time following Paul's example here as we reflect on our past as a congregation, understanding that the road has been paved for us by those who have gone before us. So to begin, I want to share a really abbreviated history of Solid Rock. Are you interested in that? This is going to be sort of a 30,000-foot view, not very detailed, but we don't often talk about the history of our church on Sundays. We do talk about it at our new members meeting. We talk about it at our welcome lunch, which we have one of those next month, as Austin just announced. If you're new to the congregation in the last 6 months or so, we'd love to have you there. We go over our history at those gatherings, but we don't often do it on Sunday mornings, and in part, that is intentional because our purpose for gathering is not to talk about this institution. Our purpose for gathering is to be drawn into worship of our God. But I do actually want to spend time doing that today. And then, probably the most interesting part of the day, I want to invite the team of people who planted this version of the church to join me so that we can express our gratitude to them. And then we're just going to have a panel discussion. I'm going to ask them a few questions and allow them to respond so you can hear from those who paved the way for our congregation. So Solid Rock Church. If you've ever thought, that sounds like a really outdated name, it sounds pretty 1990s, you would be correct. I don't know if anybody's seen that old Portlandia sketch, Dream of the 90s is alive in Portland. Well, the Dream of the 90s is alive at Solid Rock. And that it makes sense because Solid Rock was planted in 1991 on this piece of property. Over the first couple of decades of the church's existence, it experienced some highs and lows. There were seasons where it thrived, seasons where it struggled, and ultimately a season where it struggled so much that it eventually died. So we are a part of a denomination known as the AG, and as I understand it, the church had dwindled to the point where it wasn't sustainable, and so the district, which is basically our version of a diocese, the district stepped in and closed the doors completely. Well, some amount of time, I'm a little fuzzy on the details because I wasn't around. Maybe those who planted the church can fill in some of these gaps. After a certain amount of time, a group of professors and administrators and friends who are connected to Evangel University down the street, sensing a need within our tradition, within the Pentecostal tradition, for a more historically rooted, contemplative, liturgical expression of Christian faith, they decided to start this project to replant a church on this piece of property, keeping the same name, Solid Rock Church. Although it was a completely new iteration of this faith community with a different expression of worship. Fast forward a little bit to 2011, sensing the need for somebody who could offer more time and energy pastoring and leading the church through a series of coincidences, or dare I say providence. I have my own opinions, and I do think it was providential. But they reached out to my wife and I, Nanette. We were newlyweds looking for pastoral jobs all over the country. I was working at Starbucks at the time, and we met with the leadership team, and for some reason, they extended the offer to us. I had, this is my first pastoral job. I had zero experience. We visited the church and decided to take a step of faith and move into a pastoral leadership role. That was the fall of 2011. Austin and Kevin both joined within the next year or so, and now here we are 14 years later, which in some ways feels like just a few years. In other ways, it feels like a few lifetimes, but not in a bad way. One of the fascinating things to me, though, looking back on the history of this congregation, is that in some ways not much at all has changed. Now, in other ways, there is much that has changed. It is a much larger group of people who gather on a weekly basis for worship. We have this newer facility that we are worshiping in today as of the year 2020. But the general structure of our worship services, our liturgy, hasn't altered in drastic ways since the. Of course, there have been some adjustments, and it has morphed to a certain degree, but it has remained fairly consistent over the years. We also still have common meal once a month. In fact, in planning for today, Austin and I were considering doing this last week, and then it dawned on us we can't do it because that whole group of people will be in the kitchen preparing for our common meal, which I think is just a beautiful picture of consistency and those who have started this continuing to pour time and energy into those really important parts of the life of this community. But we still have common meal once a month. We still try to provide space and silence and a calm environment for introspection and a contemplative experience. And all of that was already a part of the DNA of this church from the beginning. As I mentioned a moment ago, to be honest, when we first arrived, in some ways, it really did feel providential. Because my wife and I were already sensing a pull in the liturgical direction, which if you're not from this tradition, you may not be aware, but it's not all that common in the tradition that we come from. We were already feeling a pull in that direction, and to find a place in our tradition, in our city, that was already exploring this approach to faith, it seemed so unlikely to us, and we're so grateful that we found it. And also, to be honest, I don't know if I would have lasted in pastoral work if we hadn't found a place like this, to be quite frank. A place that wasn't flashy or gimmicky. Also a place that as a leader, there was a freedom and an understanding, a recognition that I too was on a spiritual and theological journey, and that was expected and accepted, which is pretty unique, at least in my experience, and I am so thankful for that. I am grateful to our friends who had the wisdom, the insight, the foresight, a desire, and the willingness to sacrifice to help make a community like this. So if you have experienced some of those same benefits, some of those blessings that I have experienced in this community, I would invite you to thank God for that, and also to express gratitude to those who went before us and paved the way to help birth what I think is a special place, a place like this. So I want to invite our friends, Pam and Steve and Sherry and Christine and Jim, if you want to come, anybody who wants to come that was a part of that team. We weren't able to fly Oki in, unfortunately, and of course Sherry's late husband, Marty, we miss him as well. He was also a part of this team. We want to acknowledge that too. But if you want to join me, I'm going to simply facilitate a bit of a panel discussion and allow them to share their insights and thoughts as they reflect on the past. We'll sort of break the conversation into three main parts, like the early days of Solid Rock, what they see presently in light of their sustained and long-term perspective, and then also what they see moving forward in the future, their hopes and dreams for this community, given the uniqueness of their long-term perspective as well. Sound good? Let's give them a hand. Friends, we are so thankful for you. Joseph, I'm going to try to switch mics and then allow them to use this mic. Oh boy. I'm going to make a mess here, so just ignore that. Check. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, friends, for joining us and for your willingness to participate in this. I know that this is a bit unusual for us. I've never facilitated a panel discussion like this, so it may be a disaster. I don't know. We'll find out. So I may rely on you to sort of carry the conversation. But I think the first question that I would be interested in hearing from you about, and I think that would be meaningful for everybody is, what prompted this? What was the dream behind this, or what was the need that you saw maybe within our tradition that led you to start this? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I actually meant to do that. That's pretty heavy. Thank you. Doug is pretty strong, so the fact that it's pretty heavy doesn't really matter. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, so I'll open that up to you.
First of all, we all served at another church in town. We served for the decade of the 90s together at New Life. And at one point, we ended up kind of all going our separate ways. We'd moved to California and moved back. And we began to sense that we were missing something that we had before, and also the expression of the church that we were longing for wasn't really, like Matt said, in our tradition, available. And so we began thinking and talking and meeting in that room over there, because this one wasn't here. And we ended up deciding that maybe we should do something together after praying. And we actually closed the church. There were some students that were operating it for a short period of time, and we closed it down so there were no public meetings for a while, and as we prayed and planned what we're going to do at Solid Rock.
Well, Chris and I were talking about this the other night, and one of the things that we recalled so strongly was we were together with Jeff and Diane Falks, who ended up moving to Pennsylvania. But she had a health crisis. Oh, and when that happened, they were out off at some other church. We were all really separated for a little while. And that health crisis, they said, who do we need to be around? And it was us. And so we started meeting together, and just that deep sense of caring for each other and love for each other that was building. And then Steve presented this opportunity for this little church that needed home, and none of us had really found a spiritual home again. And we thought, well, maybe this is the Lord guiding us.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Let's try it.
I think another facet to add to it is that not only were we at different places, but there were reasons why we were at different places and we were not at the original church. And part of that was because in our own way, each couple, I'll just speak for us, that there was a level of disillusionment, that we struggled, like I would say that there was a discouragement that came over us, and we longed for a community that there wasn't any pretense. And that was evident in this group, that we had cleaned churches and mowed lawns for hours and things like that, where we got in and served together. And out of that, we understood that there's not a reason for pretense. There's no need for that. What is needed is a place that you can be vulnerable with your needs and worship together.
And I think one additional thing for me was when we were meeting together kind of as our group outside of the church, Steve had presented the thought, if there was an opportunity to maybe start a church, would you all be interested? And I think we all acknowledged that we were, but the emphasis was never really, okay, we want to start a church. And it really took time. We just continued to meet together and care for each other. And then the opportunity presented itself here, and we were like, okay, maybe this is the opportunity.
I love that, Jim. Thanks for sharing that part of it, because that is like the anti-church planting, church growth model. And I think that is appropriate. I think that makes sense. So thanks for sharing that part. What were some of the biggest surprises in those early days, or the biggest challenges maybe? If there were challenges, it probably was smooth sailing the whole time, right?
Anybody?
Here, I'll take. One of the challenges I remember, well, of course, money, because it was us. And basically, us and some evangel students that Steve had in his Essential Christianity class that would come over. And that was it. And so starting that way. But even before starting, trying to develop a vision statement and mission statement. And you have this group of leaders and academics and people that are kind of concerned about wording.
She's saying I wrote it and she edited it.
Many times. But we got there. We got there.
And by the way, that the purpose statement and all of those statements, they still are guiding our congregation, which I think is just a testament to the work and thought that you put into those statements and documents.
This doesn't really answer that question because I can't remember what that question was, but one of the guiding principles, and we picked this up through reading different things, is we're interested in a church that has both an ancient and a future perspective. And this was the era of contemporary churches. You know what contemporary means? Right now, as things are. And what we sensed was, sadly, that misses a whole lot of church history and tradition that we don't want to miss. And so we intentionally said we want this to be an expression that has both a connection to the broader church and ancient Christianity, but also is always saying, okay, God, what do you want to do in the future? And how can we prepare a place that will be a home for folks to connect with each other and connect with you, so that we can do the work of God through our vocational callings in the world. You guys all have callings, and it was our job to provide a place that really supported you, not all you, but the people that were here, as they went out and did what God wanted them to do during the week.
Are there any sort of key milestones or markers that you see as significant in the history of the church, maybe that even enabled you to overcome some of those hurdles or those challenges, or just significant points in those early days kept things moving forward?
Well, one thing I can think of, we were all working full-time in other capacities. A lot of us were at Evangel, but we were all working full-time. So this was our little extra venture. And so honestly, Matt, I think one of the biggest milestones was when Steve got you to come and visit the church.
And what prompted that was Rick, another guy that was with us, didn't really want to handle the preaching. And he was working at Starbucks. And I said, I said, and he said, but you need to talk to Matt. And I said, who's Matt? And he told me, and I said, what's his phone number? And I called him right then. And there was...
They turned to me out of a sense of desperation. So that's basically how I ended up here. They were desperate.
But I think when you think of God's will and providence, that was really too good to be true. Because Rick was an integral part of what we were doing, and he felt he wanted to go be a youth pastor for a while longer. And to have that connection that we'd never even heard of, and to have it, and then Matt, he said, not really interested. I said, well, come check it out. 3 weeks later, I handed him the keys. I mean, almost that quick, because I was leaving for summer in California and didn't know kind of what the future was going to be, but that's more than serendipitous. I think providential. Pam needs to say a few words.
Well, just one more thing.
She'll talk to me and she'll say it at home what I didn't do.
He does all the talking. Wonder why. No, I was just going to add that we wanted a place for ourselves, but that's not the purpose that we wanted to. That's not why we wanted to start a new church. We wanted it for the next generations. And I was going to Central Assembly and loving it, and we could have been happy and okay. We could have formed continued in our small group, but to put energy into something, we wanted it not for ourselves. And yet I don't know that I could go anywhere else if I ever had to leave here.
I think there's also this sense of a church that would be a healing place for people that had perhaps been disillusioned or hurt. And we wanted a place that people could come without the pretense, just this really organic, almost atmosphere that people could just come and feel God's presence. That's that historical, the holy, sacred part of it, that they could just feel God's presence when they walk in and just know that He's there. He hasn't forgotten them.
Can I just add one more thing? So while you were a wonderful addition, you and Nanette coming in and providing leadership, there was one element that I thought was missing that's so big in terms of worship, in terms of services, and that was music. And I didn't know what music was going to look like at Solid Rock, but none of us are necessarily gifted in that area. And so I think we struggled. And then there was this couple that showed up on a Sunday, and I didn't know anything about them, but I was drawn to pray. And that couple ended up being Kevin and Courtney. And I don't think I've ever shared that, Kevin, with you or Courtney, but I was just drawn to them. And I had no idea what their background was, but within, I don't even know if it was a year's time, but to see him and his family bring their gifts also to the church service and creating a different way of communicating through song. It's just quite beautiful and reflective, and I just really appreciate it. And I think that was a milestone for our church because it is unique. It's unplugged. So, yeah.
Yeah, most of you probably don't know this story. I don't even know if you all do. Before, Kevin's laughing because, so we had somebody who was leading music for us, and a couple of times he just didn't show up. No call, no show. That's what we called it at Starbucks. And one of the second time that happened, we had already asked Kevin if there would be an interest for him to lead music, and he said no. And his hand was sort of forced one Sunday because of the no call, no show. And he was like, well, I'll run home and get my guitar. And ran home, got his guitar. We started our worship gathering 10 minutes late, which is not all that unusual, I guess. But and led for us from that point forward. So I echo that. Yeah.
Well, one of the other milestones I was just thinking is watching you and Austin and Kevin really form your team, kind of like we were. It's like that handing off, and it's hard to even talk about. It's just a beautiful, beautiful acknowledgement that God is in this, and He was. I think even though we initiated it, you've taken it so much farther than we would have ever imagined.
How do you see the role of this faith community in our community today? Has that shifted? And then also, are there ways in which you have experienced personally that you mentioned that you wanted to provide a space for others to heal and to be able to experience and encounter the presence of Jesus, maybe without some of the baggage? Has that been a reality for you as well?
Yeah, I think it has. I know when we were envisioning what this could look like, we also wanted a place that was more eclectic. And the original church name was Solid Rock International Church. And
It actually still is,
Yeah.
officially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was a part of our heart. We wanted to be able to reach beyond just the church doors. And so I think we have seen that come to fruition. I did want to mention one funny thing, though. And Steve, you'll have more information about it. But that boulder that's out there, you want to talk about that?
Our fancy sign.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you want me to say?
Steve got this boulder, says, I've got an idea.
Wasn't it a great one? Austin's wanted to get rid of that since day one he got here. But it takes a lot to get that out of the ground.
So he found this boulder somewhere, but then we had to figure out how do you get it here.
And get it in the ground.
Heavy.
Let me just mention too, that Sherry's up here, but her husband Marty was a part of the original group. And if you didn't know Marty, it's to your detriment. He was a very unique, gifted, brilliant individual, but also at times he was a contrarian. And he probably helped us navigate some stupid decisions that we were going to do. And we really miss him because he was a part of our lives for many years. This isn't part of this either, but there's a guy right over there named Jerry that was with us at New Life that had he not moved somewhere else, he would have been involved in this as well, too.
He was the originator of the common meal.
Yeah.
That continues.
Thank you, Jerry. I love that. If you could go back and tell yourself one thing about this process, in light of lessons learned, is there anything that sticks out to you? Excluding the boulder. And then if not, what the follow-up and final question that we'll consider is, what is your prayer for the future of this church, given the uniqueness of your long-term perspective, which I think is so helpful for me to hear again, and I'm sure so helpful for everybody else to hear again. But thinking about the future, what is your hope, your prayer for the future of this community we are a part of?
Related to the prior question, the thing that I would have told myself is it won't necessarily be all smooth sailing, but just hang in there. When we stepped into this, it was really a step of faith. And we were like, God, if this is what you want for us at this point in time, we're open and we'll move forward. And we had an encounter around COVID time. So like Matt shared, the original space was behind that wall, which is kind of mind-boggling. And we had plenty of room when we were in that space. It was like, wow, what's going to happen here? And then the church began to grow, and we saw some real positive signs. And then COVID hit, and we were in the middle, maybe at the end, of building a new building, which I'm sure...
We got the occupancy permit for this room in April of 2020. So
Yeah.
you can connect the dots on how encouraging that was.
Yeah. So we had a beautiful new space, and we weren't allowed to meet in it. So, we did the online thing. And then by chance, actually, we were at an event, and we ran into Kevin because he was doing music there. And we just had a little side conversation. And we had just started coming back into the facility. And there was lots of room because people didn't really know, is it a safe place to be health-wise? And we had a conversation, and we just remember Kevin sharing, wow, we had kind of gotten to this point, and now it's so different, and almost sensing, will it ever be the same? Will we ever get back to where we were? And for Chris and I, it really hit us because we didn't know what the answer was. And then we thought, well, was that kind of it? Was that what we were supposed to do? And then COVID hit, and now what? And yet here we are today like this. So God is faithful, and I think that's the thing that I would want to tell myself, even when you may doubt, remember He is faithful.
I think one of the things I would go back and tell myself is that it was okay to disagree. We didn't always see eye to eye with everything, sometimes not with much. But we always had a deep love and respect and care for each other. And I think as I think about that, that's what got us through it. That's what kept the vision up there. And so I think for me, when you're trying something hard, it doesn't have to be easy. And we often think it does. And so maybe that's my takeaway, that hard doesn't mean bad. It just means it's hard and you get through it. But when you have people that are with you and walking with you in life, it makes all the difference. And so my prayer for the future of this church, maybe never forget where you've come from, but always look to the future. And we do know God is faithful. That's been our mantra. He always has been.
My prayer for the future, this is a unique church within our denominational setting. And I'm glad that they allowed us to do this. They didn't understand what we're going to do, is probably why they let us do it. But as I was watching the slides during announcements and saw small group leader after small group leader, that I don't know their names. Don't have any idea who these people are. And yet we worship together, but I'm not in their small group. My prayer is that we continue to develop leaders who will care for the folks that come to this church with all the variety of their needs, and also that Matt and the leadership here will have just the insight and the wisdom to take us into the future for what God wants for this congregation. And I'm confident.
Does anybody else have anything else, lingering thoughts they want to share? Yeah, Pam.
I'm so thankful for Austin, because normally if you have a great pastor like Matt,
Steve, do you want to put the mic there?
if you have a great pastor like Matt, and he leaves for vacation or something, and then you have the assistant pastor.
Second string.
And that's when you hope your friends don't come. Or you knew, yeah. It's not like that here with Austin. 100% every time.
Thank you all. Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts. And I think one of the things that, with every answer that I was reminded of, is that I just sense that their hope and their prayer for the community from the beginning has come to fruition in many ways. For me personally, I have found those things they mentioned here, a place of healing, a place of encounter, a place of community. And so personally, but then also on behalf of our congregation, we just want to honor you and extend our gratitude to you for, again, the things I've mentioned, your foresight and your willingness to sacrifice and help pave the way for all of the benefits that we find in this community, due in large part to your wisdom and your effort. So thank you. Would you give them a hand?